Let's talk about weapons of mass destruction and the history of them. We're going to skip right on by the sword and the arrow and all those other simple things like catapults and what else did they have? Cannons eventually, and guns and bullets. And we're going to talk today about trains, planes, and automobiles in that order. Let's start with the train. Imagine North America covered in forest, rainforest, unspoiled from the Arctic Circle all down to Tierra del Fuego. And there was about 50 million amerindians running around. They had no horses, so everywhere they went was by foot. And of course, they all had several different languages over the thousands of years that they were there. 12,000 roughly. And when the Americans first came over, the Europeans, the Indians actually thought, some of them, that the gods had come over. That was their first impression. All the settlements of the Europeans for the first 100 years or so, until the railroad came along, were all on the Atlantic Ocean or shortly up riverways in the Hudson Bay, but those were trappers. There was no real settlements. And it would have stayed that way for a long, long time had there not been a railroad. And it would have given the Indians time to get used to the fact that these people were people and not gods, like some of the Indians had thought, or the Amerindians. But these people were just like the Indian people with a little bit more technology. And had the railroad not come along at the time, the Indians would have had a little more time to get used to the diseases that the Europeans brought over. They would have had a few generations before the movement of the people westward. It would have been a lot slower. It would have taken hundreds and hundreds of years to slowly develop out westward. And the Indians would have had time to catch up with the technology. We can see that with Japan. They were isolated for 200 years. No, that was not long ago. And lived in a fantasy world of totalitarian dictatorship kind of thing with some kind of emperor and samurai swords. And you've seen the movie. But their contact with the outside world changed everything. In 1970, I can still remember people would make jokes about buy Japanese things because they're cheap. Now we say, and that's 30, 40 years ago, now we say buy Japanese things because you know they're going to last. I mean, they've gone from nothing, total barbarism, to world dominance. I wouldn't say dominance, but they were also running the risk of not having any babies anymore. But anyhow, they've made a huge leap and they caught up very quickly once they had contact with the outside world. And the Indians would have done the same thing had they had a little bit of time. And they needed first the time, of course, to stay healthy and not get murdered. And they wouldn't have been murdered at such a rate had the railroad not been there to bring hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of soldiers in to shoot them all down. And they had time to balance the whole technology and the understanding that the white man wasn't the god, that they were just people looking for land. It would have stopped somewhere in the middle. It would have eventually got to a point where the Indians said, okay, this is our land, that's your land, let's see if we can live together on this, but we're going to maintain some of this land how we think it should be maintained. And I think the Indians should stand up and say, well, we don't think that being slaughtered by weapons of mass destruction, the railroad, is a good thing, and we demand some control, at least over the western part of the North American continent and the South American continent. I think they should be able to get that. I'm not sure how much it would change, but I think it should at least change the concept of who owns North America. Right now it's actually owned by concerns, corporate concerns. Most of it, the money belongs to the bank, the World Bank. I mean, everything's owned. And I think if we could, I think it would be even in the European white man descendants' interest for the Indians to win this case. To win this case, it says they have at least the right to part of the North American, South American land and a large stripe of it all along the coast. There has to be somewhere where their philosophy matters and the white man has no say anymore. And of course, it doesn't mean that the two people have to live separately. There's probably too many white people to even have them all shipped out. But the philosophy, the whole concept of how we approach the idea of we own the land or we are from the land, we've got to switch that around a bit. So there you go. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about next. Planes. Okay, we'll talk about planes in a second. Well, planes actually made all borders obsolete. So even mountain ranges didn't matter anymore. Somehow Switzerland still manages to hold off inside there, but they got a great army. It's always the thing. As soon as you get yourself a great army, you're safe. That's the way the game. And that's why America doesn't want anybody to get weapons of mass destruction like railroads. Or chemical weapons are hit these days. But nice thing about the railroad is it can be used as a public convenience when everything settles down. Atom bombs aren't like that. You can't really use them for anything. And planes, well, I like them as transportation to get over the Atlantic Ocean and whatnot. But their first invention was also for dropping bombs. They came into existence first, of course, because somebody wanted to. But the first thing was used for is military, and it's still the main thing it's used for. The only real reason there's huge amounts of technology thrown into aviation is for the military reasons, and public transportation comes second. And I don't know, I think we've all seen enough war movies and news medias about how bombs planes fly over a city and then cover the city in bombs. I mean, without planes we wouldn't have that technology. So perhaps we're too young for this technology. If we can't have planes and restrain from dropping fields of bombs on other people, then perhaps we shouldn't be building planes. Perhaps we need to slow down a little bit. What about that? And the automobile. Well, the automobile, that is probably the most deadly weapon of mass destruction that's ever hit the earth. The automobile. I don't even want to talk about it. The automobile is so disgusting. I'd love to have one, which disgusts me, but it is destroying this planet without any prejudice. It just destroys the whole planet. And it's probably our worst enemy is the automobile. I mean, I'd like to have some kind of transportation, but we have to figure out how to do it without choking up the planet. And of course, this all hangs right on back to the same story of war, because the automobile is driven with petroleum, and of course that's what all the wars are about. It's the hottest mineral resource right now is oil. And that's it for today. So remember, when you're talking about weapons of mass destruction, they're everywhere, and we got to start figuring out how to deal with them, because they're beyond us, and we got to catch up, just like the Japanese did, just like the Indians would have had they not all been slaughtered, and just like we will if we work it all out together. Because really, we're all one thing, and probably the sooner we figure it out, the better. A world government, well, I think it's inevitable. The question will be how, and obviously dictatorship is not the right answer. And right now, of course, Europe has a dictatorship with this money system. I mean, it's a comfortable dictatorship, but it's still a bit weird. So maybe we need to talk about what do we do next?